certainly is not the kind of lab work that I'm used to looking at and approving. This is the page that's the transport record of Floyd's sample from the end of stage 17 to the laboratory. And the number I see here is 995476. Again, his number on the barcode is 474. There is no 474 that I see on this page. Maybe it's a matter of handwriting interpretation. You know, maybe it is a 4. I can't be sure, but there's room for question. Here on the page that Floyd received, and I apologize for the bad quality here, here on the page that Floyd allegedly had a result on, 995475, again, that's not his number. And we now know from the lab that 995475 was a sample they examined during the laboratory at the same time as they examined 995474. Now, I'm not sure if I'm looking at Floyd's result or not. That's the way it works when I look at reports and do peer review. Things have got to match up. Now remember, I showed you that barcode. That barcode is on the first container. That's the A and the B sample. It's not complicated. We go to the checkout stand, we send something by FedEx, it's barcoded all the way along. The machine reads barcodes. Whether there's a legible handwriting or a handwriting problem, this is, to my mind, inexcusable because it's not complicated and the machines already have the technology to do barcodes the whole way along. We don't need to. We should never have had this problem to even wonder whether it's a sample or not. And wondering whether it's sample or his sample or not is one thing. Sloppiness in the lab, that's a certainty. In evaluating testosterone and epitestosterone, two hormones that the body produces, laboratories recognize that contamination or breakdown of the product is a big problem, so much so that WADA mandates that the amount of broken down or free testosterone or epitestosterone must not exceed 5%. This is not my rule. Just like the cross-out, although I think it's something that you shouldn't do, this is also a WADA rule. Just as in the cross-outs and how it has to be done, which weren't done correctly as I showed you, the contamination issue, this is a WADA rule. This isn't my rule. 5%, you should not examine the sample. I did the math. I looked at the documents. I looked how much free epitestosterone there was. I looked what the total was. I came up with 7.7%. Math wasn't necessarily my strongest subject in school. I know some of us are afraid of math. I asked other people to check it. They came up with the same percentage. You can do the calculation in your mind. You can have a calculator maybe on your phone. Maybe your phones are on. But 7.7%, that's what I came up with. These are the original papers of the document packet where it came from. You know, now I've got to wonder, how did it ever get this far? Because as I read the WADA rules, 7.7% contamination, that's the end of it. But it wasn't the end of it, as we know. No lab is perfect in how it measures things. I mean, no system gives you exactly the same number time after time. If you step on the scale, see what your weight is in the morning, and then you step off the scale and step back on later in the day, or even right away, you might not get exactly the same number. We know things are perfect. In fact, this laboratory says it's imperfect enough that it doesn't hold itself to being able to measure testosterone more accurately than 20% on repeated measurements, or epitestosterone 30%, or the ratio by 20%. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I will tell you other labs are better. But let's see how the lab did. They measured 2 confirmation testosterone epitestosterone ratios in the A sample. On one occasion, they had testosterone at 61 nanograms, and on another occasion, 172. If I step on the scale and I see 62 pounds, and then I see 172 pounds, that's not 30%. That's not close. That's no good. That's bad. That's like, you know, 1 water bottle versus 3 water bottles. That's not good. And again, I'm not making it up. And the slideshow is on my website. It's on the Floyd Fairness on the website. You can see where the documents come from. This is how good the lab was. Well, maybe the absolute numbers really aren't the issue, and maybe you just need to look at the ratios. Maybe that's all you need to look at. Well, Here again in the A sample, sometimes you heard the ratio was 11, sometimes it was 11. Sometimes it was only 5. In the screening it was 5, and the confirmation it was 11. We agreed that the confirmation sometimes gives different numbers than the screening. But it's not allowed to be different by more than 30%. So something's wrong in how they're measuring things. And if I get numbers that are this far apart when I look at a medical chart, I don't take one number rather than the other number. I have no basis to do that. What I do is I look at it and I say, this doesn't make sense, and I can't accept either. And again, just to show you that I'm not making numbers up, this is the actual pages from the documents where they come from. Before Floyd's case, I was naive. I had never looked at a document package. I didn't know, really. I still don't know. I had no idea. I have no idea how many athletes dope or don't dope. But I did, in the back of my mind, know about this testosterone-epitestosterone ratio. And I did know the theory was that the body makes about the same amount of testosterone as it does epitestosterone, and that most people should have a ratio of about 1. I knew that if the ratio was more than 6, up until a couple of years ago, you were presumed to have doped. And I knew in the last couple of years that ratio had been lowered to 4 to 1. And from what I had read, not really from what I really knew, not from studies or anything else, but from what I had read, I had assumed that if you were over that ratio of 4 to 1, chances are you had doped. Certainly, that's the impression we had, that's the impression we do have, whenever we hear that an athlete has quote-unquote failed a test. Well, Watta's own labs responded to a survey in 2005, representing 150,000 testosterone-epitestosterone ratios performed on athletes. The vast majority of them, absolutely, they were under 4. But of the roughly 1,000 that were between 4 and 6, only 2 were shown by carbon isotope testing to have doped. And only 1 was shown by longitudinal testing, and I believe that case has been thrown out. So the bottom line is that although, quote-unquote, one fails the screening testosterone-epitestosterone test, in fact, the vast majority of people have not been shown to dope. In fact, 99.7%. In fact, it's a very good test to prove that somebody hasn't doped, rather than to have suspected that they have doped. But generally speaking, if a lab releases that an athlete has tested more than 4 to 1, and that athlete's information is in the press, the presumption of everyone reading that is the athlete is doped. I'm telling you, that's completely wrong. If it's between 4 and 6, and Floyd was 4.9, excuse me, on one occasion, and 5.1 on another, the presumption should be innocence, not guilt. This is a page, this is page 200 of the document package. On this page, I will tell you that there are 15 errors. I'm only showing 8 because 5 I'm not, or 7 I'm not allowed to talk about yet because they come from discovery packages that are under seal. But there are 6 crossouts on the page. Let's see how all this is explained. I'm not sure if you can read it. There's a reference solution here in the green box, and the same reference solution is given 2 different concentrations. That can't be. If the concentration of the reference solution used to examine the specimen, the guidepost, if they can't write down, if they can't figure out what that concentration is, I don't know how they can perform any analysis. That's just one example of many, many problems in how they're putting the document package together. To the lab's credit, they had one of the first machines to do carbon isotope ratio testing. That's great. The problem is that that machine came off the assembly line so fast it didn't even have its own software and operating manual yet. And the software that the lab is using is the original software. They've never updated. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with operating system 2, OS 2, although it is, you know, I mean, way before Windows 95, and remember how many problems Windows 95 had. It's the application that was written for it that is obsolete. It's not supported anymore. There have been 6 fixes to it, and it's been abandoned a long time ago. And it's the firmware that originally came with the machine. So although they were ahead when they started, they're certainly behind in technology now. And I'm not sure who this is. I think it's supposed to remind me of the Flintstones. But it is kind of prehistoric in terms of the way these things are going now. And one of the problems they had was that, as their document package clearly shows, they were operating the machine out of specification. And if you operate the machine with too high a pressure, as they did,